Well, hey there, sweet peas. Welcome back to Friendless. I'm your host, James Avramenko, and this week I'm chatting with Dr. Greg Hammer. Dr. Hammer is a retired Stanford professor and physician and the author of A Mindful Teen. We discuss social pressures facing our youth today, social media perfection traps, and the benefits of a little bit of gratitude. A quick heads up, this episode does discuss suicide and self-harm, but it is a fantastic conversation that I've been really looking forward to sharing. So it's time to lean back, get comfy, set your volume at a reasonable level, and enjoy my interview with the one and only Dr. Greg Hammer here on Friendless. How are you doing today?
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, this is literally our first time chatting. And these kind of interviews are always so exciting for me because it's always like it could go one of two ways. It could go just totally off the rails, or suddenly I have a new best friend,
Hopefully the latter.
Right? That's always the aim. So, Dr. Hammer, amongst a myriad of things, you are a recently retired professor from Stanford University of School of Medicine. You're a pediatric intensive care physician. You are also an author of not only the book Gain Without Pain, but also the newly published A Mindful Teen. And those feel like just scratching the surface. I don't think I can do it justice, really. I often open my interviews with a very blunt question to my guests of, who the hell are you?
Well, I've always been interested in what I guess you might call wellness. Very active in sports, and my undergraduate degree was in nutritional science. So I've always been interested in nutrition. I stopped eating meat when I was 18.
Mm-hmm.
I've gotten very interested in sleep physiology. So I think the fundamentals of our physical well-being are sleep, exercise, and nutrition.
Yeah.
I've taken a deep dive into longevity science, but I am really also interested in resilience, and therefore, I think a path to personal resilience being what's commonly called mindfulness practice. And that's kind of a buzzword, I think, that people probably shut their brains off when they hear it to some degree, or at least some people do. But, I've learned that our brains are wired in ways that benefit our survival or favored our survival, not necessarily anymore, and not happiness. But what's the one thing that all nearly 8 billion of us want, and that is happiness.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been a longtime meditator and student of non-duality.
Mm.
And how can we be more happy, and why aren't we more happy, I guess, fundamentally? So in addition to physical well-being, sleep, exercise, nutrition, supplements, potentially drugs that may promote healthy longevity or health span, I think we really need to focus on our mental well-being. And that sort of led me to the two issues that are most challenging to us. And they are, one, we have a negativity bias. So we tend to remember the negative and forget the positive. And the other one is that we have a hard time being present. Our minds, if you just sort of close your eyes and try to pay attention to what's happening right now, even just physically, the sensation of the chair against your body, maybe a passing automobile or airplane, our mind will quickly go to the future or the past. And then you combine that with our negativity bias. When we overthink the future, we generate a lot of fear and anxiety. We catastrophize. Everything has sort of a negative overtone, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And when we ruminate or overthink the past, we generate a lot of shame, regret. I think it's a source of depression. So I think to be mentally resilient and happier, we need to be more present and sort of let go of this negativity bias. So that's really the derivation of the GAIN approach. It's a mindfulness practice, it's a lifestyle. And GAIN is an acronym in caps for the elements of gratitude, acceptance, intention, and non-judgment. So kind of to summarize, I'm long-standing interested in physical and mental wellness, and that's why I went into medical school and continue to be very interested in those things. And the new book, A Mindful Teen, is really based on my having cared for teenagers my whole professional life, raised a couple, and just noticed what challenges they face. I have a 18-year-old and then two older kids, and teenagers right now, and the rest of us to a large extent, they are especially developing and I think are most affected by so many things that I never had to face when I was a teenager, certainly, and even my older kids never had to face. So that's why I wanted to really kind of take a deep dive into those issues that teens face and what I would consider some at least roads to helping them, supporting them, and employing the gain method in that context.
I love that. You have already opened the door to so many different threads that I want to unpack, but I know we're on a time limit, so I got to pick my words carefully here. I'm very much a man who will choose 10 words when one would suffice. So, I'll try and kind of,
You should try writing a book, and then you'll
get it all out, right?
out with 500 pages, but your publisher will tell you have to whittle it down to 250, and that's the best way to be succinct.
Right? Tell me about, oh my God. So, you were talking about the idea of resilience, and something I was just talking about the other day with someone about youth and about the pressures that they're facing is this idea of we often have heard this kind of idiom in the past of like, well, kids are resilient, and kids are this and that. And what we were talking about though was when you actually follow that thought is they have to be, because that's how you survive is whatever situation you're in, you figure it out. But it almost sort of shouldn't be that way. Kids shouldn't have to be resilient. They should be shown resilience, but they shouldn't have it forced on them. And I feel like a lot of the work that you're doing here is how to sort of bridge that gap and how to open this conversation. A friend of mine was just telling me the story of their younger sibling who basically will never do anything. Like they're just this immensely boring person because they're terrified of the possibility of being filmed, having it shared, go online, suddenly go viral. So we have this whole generation that is basically self surveilling and shutting themselves down from behaviors that we would have done 10, 20 years ago without a second thought. And I guess I'm curious, in your observations and in your research, you've highlighted a few different areas, and I don't think it's sort of like one is more important than the other, but things like social media, smartphones, AI, environmental crises, all these factors, political polarization, everything. Where do you begin to sort of parse out the impacts of these different factors in order to even be able to make a bit of a roadmap of how to address these things?
I think the key to addressing all those challenges, and I think you mentioned several, I think smartphones certainly are a double edged sword. There are some good things about
Of course.
social media and access to social media being in your pocket, but there's also a lot of hazards. People with distorted images of what a human being is, this sort of idea that you have to be perfect and beautiful or handsome, etc. And there's also a lot of potential for shaming and bullying and something called sextortion, which it's a term that's relatively new to me.
Yeah.
I think in particular with AI has the potential to really damage a lot of young people in particular. And then, as you said, the political divide, I think families have a lot of tension and, people don't talk to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Gun violence, we certainly never had that. And it's just completely out of control, of course. And practically every day you have a story in the news about some terrible tragedy. Drugs, we sort of knew what we were doing and taking, whether we want, you could sort of gauge what risk you wanted to take, for example. Although I don't think we were necessarily very good at managing risk. That's part of being a teenager and having a developing.
Yep.
But nowadays, there's fentanyl in so many different
Mm.
recreational substances, and, kids overdose
Mhm.
without thinking that they had a risk of overdosing. So there's just so many issues that teens face. I think even just the pressure of getting into college.
Yeah.
It's kind of baffling to me in a way, but I think it's much more competitive than it used to be. There's more teens applying to college than there are spaces compared to when I was applying to college.
Yeah.
I just know so many kids, friends of my daughter's, who had straight A's and they had lots of extracurricular activities and they maybe got into their safety school. So I just don't quite understand that. But anyway, there's just a lot of pressure and a lot of sources of anxiety. And again, I think the solution to all these things, what they all have in common is that they're amenable to paths that lead to greater resilience. And I think that's really a matter of, I kind of whittled it down to the four elements of gain. I think learning to be grateful. So when we're feeling like the weight of the world on our shoulders and we're feeling sorry for ourselves or what have you, go to your gratitude, flip it over and get away from that negativity and think of all the wonderful things we have for which to be grateful. Acceptance. So there's a lot of things in the world that don't comport with what we think we want and need. And if we can't change them, then we need to learn to accept them if we're going to be happier. Whereas our natural tendency is to sort of resist things that don't agree with us. The I in gain is intention. And again, our brains are programmed, just I think through evolution, to be wary, negative, worrying about what might happen next. That served us well 200,000 years ago when we were huddled in our cave trying to keep a fire going and worried there might be a saber-toothed tiger lurking outside the mouth of our cave.
Yeah.
The genes and epigenes that coded for wariness led to greater survival, perhaps the ability to have more offspring. And so these genes and epigenetic factors were favored from an evolutionary standpoint. And therefore, here we are 200,000 years later, stuck with those traits that no longer really serve us well.
Yeah.
So we have to have a plan. Fortunately, our brains have this amazing quality called neuroplasticity. So, if we have a plan, we can actually rewire our brains and change the way we think and exist. And the end and gain is non-judgment. And we're overly judgmental. And when you combine that with our negativity bias, we judge others, the world, and particularly ourselves in a negative light. And the good news, again, is that we have this quality of neuroplasticity. We can change the way we think. So we do our gain meditation in the morning, and I've designed that to be a 3-minute practice. So then we do our little gain practice, emphasizing those things linked with our slow, deep, deliberate breathing. And then, perhaps I have a cup of coffee and then I get in my car to go to work and somebody cuts me off on the road and I start to make all these negative judgments about the driver.
Yep.
And a light bulb goes off and I realize I'm being overly judgmental, and I can drop the judgment and I get a little dopamine hit, a little laugh instead of a hit of adrenaline, chronic stress. So I think that what we can embody in terms of helping our teens is this approach, this sort of easy to learn and practice approach to life that serves us well by being more grateful, accepting, intentional, and less judgmental. And, we can't just tell our teenagers what to do. We have to show them by what we do, and they're watching us and they're quite good at picking up on our behaviors. So if we embrace these practices, we can help teach our teens, and this will help them become more resilient in the face of those challenges that we discussed.
Yeah. Isn't that the case too, though? Didn't you just nail it, of the idea of like, when you tell a child something, do something, but you don't do it, immediately you're creating this kind of conflict within them where they're like, well, you're not doing it, so why should I? Especially when you get into the teen years where they're learning independence and they're starting to push back and they're starting to form who they actually are and how they're going to show up in the world.
I mean, if we tell them you should be more grateful because look at all the wonderful things we have, the friends and family and all the love and good relationships and a roof over our head and food on the table and running water and so on, that some less fortunate people in the world don't have. Let's remember that. And yet we're constantly complaining and griping and being negative. That message is just not going to get anywhere.
A lot of what you're talking about, what really grabbed me and resonated so deeply with me is that it feels like you've really taken, so I've done workshops and I've done a lot of practice of my own with dialectical behavior therapy, just because of my own kind of experiences in my life and the variety of letters that I have assembled on my portfolio, And what I love so much about what you're teaching is it really distills a lot of that greater system and that very complex system into something that, you can do in these really accessible ways. And while I still, I hold DBT in such a high regard, I think adding a resource like this to that toolbox, and funny enough, that's a dialectical right there, is that it doesn't have to be, it's either this or that. It can be, well, let's use both and let's put them both together, right? I guess beside buy the book and read the book and apply it, listeners are curious about taking their first steps and explaining this kind of gain method. What are some initial stages or steps that you recommend to explore? Like what's going to actually benefit me and my personal progress?
Well, I would recommend that people learn and regularly have a practice.
Mm.
Again, we learn through repetition in small increments, baby steps, small bites, however you want to think about it. And I think the main thing is to get started with an approach that's positive, that will help you be more optimistic and present,
Mm.
and stick with it. And when I was trying to encapsulate what I thought was a good pragmatic approach, I thought, well, what are the essential ingredients of happiness?
Mm.
And how can I perhaps create an acronym that
Mhm.
I can remember that will facilitate my own practice? I thought, well, 5 items is too many. I won't remember it. 3, I'm probably leaving something out.
Yeah.
I thought 4 was about right for my own memory and ability to really remember something. So that's how I came up with the acronym.
Mhm.
And of course, these are tried and true ingredients.
Mhm.
Having a gratitude practice is well
Mm.
described and very common. Many people will journal.
Mhm.
I'm not a journaler. I've tried it. Tried having a book by my bed, my end table, and perhaps writing down my dreams when I woke up and things like that. That doesn't endure. But even if you just mentally picture that for which you're grateful, it's
Mm.
of benefit. There's a big study that's been going on. I'm not 100% sure it's still ongoing, but we started at Duke University. It's called Three Good Things.
Mm.
And essentially, the nuts and bolts are that just by acknowledging 3 things that went well during the day before you go to sleep,
Mm.
and this practice doesn't take any time. You can do it while you're turning down the bed linens, for example. Today I took my dogs for a walk. It was a beautiful day and got fresh air, and it was just watching them brings me joy.
Yeah.
2, I had a wonderful lunch with a friend. 3, I was on this terrific podcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you could stop there. Just
Yeah.
3 good things that happened during the day. When you do that regularly, it actually improves your quality of sleep and improves your quality of life.
Yeah.
These are survey
Mhm.
studies, where people fill out their own well-being surveys that have been well vetted and documented. But simply just thinking of 3 good things, it's a gratitude practice.
Mhm.
So I think gratitude is intrinsic to happiness.
Yeah.
So just doing that, I think,
Yeah.
get started. Do it every evening before you go to sleep.
Yeah.
Remember to do it. Put it in your calendar, set an alarm, what have you.
Yeah.
That will help you get some traction. I think just getting started is important. And, but then, as you go along, I think adding the other elements. The gain practice is really meant to be a 3-minute meditation. And so I can kind of walk you through it. I think
Yeah.
just getting started and embracing a practice that you'll stick with.
Mm. Mhm.
It's like exercising, for example. You go to the gym, you have a routine.
Mhm.
You'll do a dozen different exercises, 3 sets of each one. You have an organized way of doing it.
Mhm.
You do it every time you go. You have the goal of going 3 times a week. Um, this is the kind of routinized endeavor that I think will help us succeed.
Mhm.
So in the gain practice, I tell my trainees, set your alarm 3 minutes earlier than you normally would. So if you're going to get up
Mm.
at 5:30 in the morning, and I know that sounds ungodly, but that's my world and working in the operating room, the intensive care unit,
Yeah.
especially for the trainees, they've got to go set the room up or make
Right.
rounds before we all make rounds as a group.
Yeah.
Anyway, if you're going to get up at 5:30, set your alarm for 5:27. So you kind
Mm.
of set your attention the night before.
Mhm.
And you wake up, you open the blinds, do your morning hygiene thing, find a comfortable place to sit, close your eyes, and first focus on the breath. I think the breath is intrinsic to pretty much every form of meditation, if you will. And there's so many physiologic benefits. It actually activates the vagus nerve, it slows our heart rate, lowers our blood pressure, gives us a sense of calm just by breathing slowly, deeply, and deliberately. So we breathe in to a count of 3 through the nose, fill our chest and abdomen, pause to a count of 3, and then just let the breath go without effort to a count of 4.
Mm.
And do that a couple of times. And if each count is 1 second, 3 and 4 is 10. So you're breathing 6 times a minute.
Yeah. That's perfect.
So you do that, and then you just do a self-guided tour. You start with things for which you're grateful. It can be, I'm gainfully employed. I've got a roof over my head. I love my dog. I have a great partner, what have you. And you do this while you continue to breathe slowly, deeply, and deliberately. And then you transition to the A in gain, which is acceptance. So I think it's important to learn how to live with the things that cause us discomfort. So imagine something even painful. I lost my son at the age of 29, 8 years ago. And so I often have that just come into my mind, my focus. And as I'm doing my slow, deep, deliberate breathing, I picture my son and the pain of his passing. And I imagine opening my chest, opening my heart, bringing this feeling into my heart and just supporting it, nurturing it, breathing with it, relaxing my body into it. We can ask ourselves the question at some point, can I live with this pain forever? And the answer is eventually yes, I can. Yeah. I've accepted it. We transition then in our mind during this process to intention. And we might just say, my intention is to be present for 5 seconds or 10 seconds. So just experience the pressure of the chair against my body, the sound of a passing airplane or automobile, or the sound of the air coming through the vents, what have you. And, your mind will tend to wander, but just bring it back to those sensations for a brief period of time, 5 seconds this week, 10 seconds next week, etc. And then with the deep breathing, transition to the N in gain, which is non-judgment. And a tool that I often recommend is imagine a picture of the Earth, an image of the Earth apparently suspended in space, one of these beautiful NASA images. And the Earth is a lovely planet, but it doesn't possess the qualities of goodness or badness. There's no judgment.
It just is.
It's just what it is, exactly. And therefore, it's logical for me to believe that I, too, am just the person that I am. And we are doing this slow, deep, deliberate breathing and just imagining this I amness. And maybe just repeat silently, I am. And we link that to our deep breathing, and then we just focus on the breath, and then we slowly open our eyes and we're ready to go out in the world. And that can take 3 or 4 or 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And what happens is that then when we're being ungrateful or resisting or lapsing into the old ways of thinking and being, a light bulb goes off and we can have a little laugh to ourselves and redirect our thoughts and attention to being grateful again or accepting. So it's, analogous to just going to the gym and having your routine. Just make it part of your day, brushing your teeth, doing your other hygienic maneuvers, etc. And I think that really, to me, has just transformed the way I think and the way I interact with the world, others, and myself. And, so there it is. And I think that can help us cope with all of these things.
Yeah.
The politics, the terrible tragedies happening around the world, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. What's wonderful about it too is this idea of, to continue that analogy of the gym is, I know with a lot of my practices, it almost feels like it's not hard enough at first, right? You think you should be like, I need to show up and I need to lift 500 pounds in one go. But you realize that, no, you show up first and you lift 5 pounds, and you do your reps and you build those muscles. And, I remember a couple of years ago, I started doing a thing where I was practicing sort of like self-confidence, and I started doing this thing where no matter what happened, if I caught my reflection somewhere, I would have to stop and I would have to give myself a compliment, and I'd say, hey, you look great, or hey, nice hair today, or whatever it is, every single time, no matter where I was. And for a long time it felt really goofy and it felt really silly and it was hard and I felt kind of embarrassed and resistant. But then the more I did it, the more I made myself do it, the easier it got, and then the more integrated and embodied those feelings became, and there was just less resistance to just feeling good about myself, and what I love
like
about
that. That's a beautiful practice, actually.
Yeah, it's really nice. And I continue to do it still to this day because it's just this easy little thing. But I think what you're talking about is built in that same modality. And I really appreciate it because it's accessible. And I think sometimes, I know myself very much so, but I know a lot of people I speak to, they think that they can ignore the little tiny things because somehow they'll make bigger movement if they do these big, huge declarative motions, when really what actually shifts you and gets you into a new mode is by focusing on those little elements of just
Well, I think
take
you
5
know,
little minutes, you know?
yeah, I love that, and I think that you have hit on some of the gain elements just through that
Yeah.
practice. One is I'm grateful, I'm in reasonably good shape,
Yeah.
or I my period certainly could be worse, or what have you. I'm grateful for that,
Yeah.
and I'm gain non-judgment. Like
Exactly.
we have a negativity bias.
Mhm.
We judge others, the world, and ourselves negatively. Sort of that's our innate tendency, and
Mm.
particularly I think we're hard on ourselves, and that's the
Big
most
time.
difficult thing to overcome, because I remember all the negative things that happened during my medical career. Do I
Exactly.
remember all the lives that I may have saved, etc.? Not really.
Yeah.
What I remember are the bad outcomes,
Yeah.
and if I'd done something differently, even 5 or 10 minutes
Yeah.
beforehand, I may have changed the outcome to something better.
Mhm.
So when you look at yourself, your image in a reflection, and you say, it's good, it's
Yeah.
positive,
Yeah.
you're basically rewiring the way you think away from this negative self-judgment. Just that simple little practice, you've embodied gratitude, acceptance, if you
Mhm.
will, intention, because you've set your mind at doing this practice and now
Mhm.
you're doing it, and non-judgment.
Yeah.
You've bent the curve away from
Mm.
being so harshly self-judgmental and negative.
Yeah.
Even as small an item as that is,
Yeah.
you're taking advantage of your brain's ability to adapt and change the way you think, and it makes a
Exactly.
big difference.
It really does. And that all of this kind of leads me towards, I know your new book, it talks about a myriad of things, but it really talks about how to sort of connect with teens about mental health and about some of the pressures that they are facing. What I find really resonant about it is that it's not necessarily a book written for teens to read so much as it's written for people to help teens. And I think that that's a really powerful message. A big thing that came up in our emails back and forth in setting up the interview was around the topic of suicide. And, I realize this is a bit of a leap in, but in a lot of ways, I like to kind of just go 2 feet forward and 2 feet first in these topics, because as you talk about in the book, suicide still continues to be this really deeply taboo topic. And a lot of people really struggle to discuss it and to kind of work with it in the same way that you're discussing working with any emotion. It's an element of something that is, to me, inherently benign, but we make it hard because we don't talk about it. And I guess to begin with, centered around this book, where do you see us beginning the sort of destigmatization conversation? And how do you see that correlating with prevention of escalating to potential suicidality?
Well, that's a good question. I guess we're approaching the end of National Suicide
Yeah,
Prevention Month, and the suicide hotline, by the way, for anybody who's got serious thoughts of suicide, is 988, and there are many others. But um, no, I think that depression is so common, and it's a spectrum, of course. I think for people with serious life-changing depression, they definitely are well advised to seek professional help, for sure.
of course.
But for the rest of us, I think it, almost all of us, certainly myself included, have periods of sadness, the winter blues, if you will,
Yeah, the sads. Yeah,
but also just this negativity bias. And I think that does lead to depression and this negative self-talk, self-judgment, etc. So it's very common. And I think the first thing is we might all recognize that this is not our dirty little secret,
mm-hmm.
that everybody is wired this way. I think for parents, just to be very cognizant of the fact that teenagers can be especially susceptible to depression and a lot of negativity and negative self judgment because of the fact that their brain is still developing,
Mm-hmm.
their frontal cortex is still developing, their personality is still developing, and they're subjected to all this social media where they're comparing themselves constantly to those who seem idealized. And they're also subjected to bullying and shaming and terrible things through social media and online. And they have all these other issues they're still trying to sort out, as we've discussed.
Yeah.
Eco-anxiety, political divide, drugs, gun violence, etc.
Mhm.
So parents, we all love our children. That goes
Yeah.
without saying. But I think we all love our children. We all want them to succeed and be happy, and so we just need to be connected
Mm.
and non-judgmental. And there are topics that kids may be very depressed and even suicidal over, and they have to do with their sexuality.
Mhm.
And there are topics that are uncomfortable for us to bring up,
Mhm.
but we should bring them up. We should bring up sexuality. We should bring up, this isn't necessarily a contributor to suicide, but sexually transmitted diseases.
Mhm.
As I write about in the book, how common chlamydia is. It can lead to pelvic inflammatory disease in women and infertility in women and men. HPV, for which there's a vaccination now that may lead to cancer if not immunized.
Mhm.
So, that we need to be non-judgmental with our kids, listen, be open-minded, and kind of get ourselves comfortable with uncomfortable topics.
Yeah. With the idea of the emotional dysregulation that is so inherent in sort of adolescence, and this idea of the spikes, and you've talked about earlier too, the idea of like replacing sort of adrenaline spikes with dopamine spikes and things like that, and yet at the same time we're also working with these kind of dopamine machines, right? The smartphones, and how kind of saturated with dopamine that's making us, and video games, social media. And I'm curious, as a doctor, how do you see these dopamine floods affecting not only adolescents but everyone? I can't help but feel like adults are not immune to that either, right?
No, you're talking about addiction, really. And
Yeah.
there's sort of, we say kind of a little bit charm that so and so is a creature of habit.
Right.
I'm a creature of habit.
Yeah.
In a way, though, if you take that to a little bit of an extreme, you're sort of addicted to your lifestyle. So,
Mm.
do you have the same thing for breakfast every day? You're sort of addicted to this. If you don't have access to that same breakfast, or
Mhm.
whatever it is, you're out of sorts. And yes, you're right. So our phone chimes, we're getting a text, you do get a little hit of dopamine.
Yeah.
And not only that, but you feel obliged to answer your text
Yeah.
right away. And if you don't, you just can't stop thinking about it. So this is a sort of a habitual pattern where there's a stimulus and a response to the stimulus, and this becomes ingrained.
Mm.
And, this may involve hits of dopamine. When you see an image on your phone or get a certain response to a stimulus that brings some kind of pleasure or something
Mhm.
positive.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I think we need to be aware of exactly what you just said, that we are surrounded, and unfortunately through AI, I think we're going to be subjected to an increasing amount of this, where it's sort of tailored to our apparent wants and needs that
Mm.
are being pushed to us, that are meant to grab our attention, give us that little dopamine hit, and get us relatively addicted to
Mm.
whatever it is, advertisement or streaming service or what have you. So, yes, I think it's something that we do need to be aware of. And we're kind of like mechanical beings in a certain way. So, our brains are hardwired. You can just dive into the neurologic connections. We have 100 billion neurons in our brain and 100 trillion synapses. The more we exercise a certain pathway of neural connections, those connections are the synapses,
Mhm.
the little space between the neurons where they speak to each other, the more ingrained they get. So through repetition, these neural pathways become further and further ingrained. If it's a dopaminergic pathway, maybe that is a little pleasure pathway that gets ingrained, and we get relatively or absolutely addicted
Mm.
to that stimulus. And something for all of us to be aware of. And that's why I think, as parents and counselors and coaches and teachers, we need to kind of embody what's important. We need to teach our teens through our own behaviors what's really important. Set the smartphones aside during family time. Mealtime is not a time to have your phone next to you on the dining table.
Yeah.
Demonstrate acts of kindness, demonstrate social connectivity rather than just connectivity with our smartphones.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, I think we need to be more aware of what you were pointing toward, and that is this dopamine hit, this addiction, this habitual response we get to various stimuli. And I think this is going to become an increasing problem in the realm of AI.
Mm-hmm. I've been talking about how if we make it far enough, I do think that things like social media and smartphones are going to be classified as illicit substances because they create similar dopamine hits as drugs and alcohol. I feel like down the road somewhere, somebody's going to reclassify them.
Well, we are, at least, like when I was doing research for writing the book, and the content of the book as it was finalized included this growing trend whereby schools are forbidding the use of cell phones during school hours. And I
Yeah.
think now that's become pretty standard.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that was just kind of getting some traction even a year ago or
Mm-hmm.
18 months ago. The Surgeon General came out with a statement about it. Various governors started talking about it, and now public schools and private schools too have pretty much embraced this. So we do need to kind of have some control over the stimuli that our kids are constantly bombarded with,
Yeah.
and exactly as you expressed.
Yeah. I'm cognizant of the time. The thing is that I feel like I could talk to you for hours, and I already am like, we're going to have to set up a sequel here because we need to talk about so many more things. But I want to make sure we kind of wrap up on a good point or on a strong point and give you a little bit of space to talk about it too. One piece I wanted to sort of look at before we wrapped up is this idea of distinguishing between some people get depression, some people get a little sad. And how do we sort of differentiate those things from the outside? And how do we sort of distinguish? My initial piece of my question is this idea of how do we try to distinguish between those kind of traits, especially in young people, if we're working with the youth or if they're kids or things like that.
I think there are definitions of clinical depression
Mm-hmm.
that we can recognize in ourselves potentially and others. They have to do with inadequate inability to sleep or excessive sleep, changes in appetite, like at one extreme or the other, overeating and also loss of appetite. Kids get withdrawn. So, if a teenager is the victim of some kind of social media scam or shaming, um, um, they may be withdrawn. They may just go to the room and close the door. Their friends sort of drop off one by one.
Yeah.
Their school performance begins to trail off. So there are, sort of signs of clinical depression and anxiety that are recognizable, and they're in the diagnostic manual that we have in medicine. These are the characteristics of clinical depression. And then on the other hand, as you suggested, there's just sadness without those other signs. So I think that parents need to be, and teachers need to be, and want to be very clued in to observing their teen and discussing it with them. Again, maybe an uncomfortable topic, but really checking in, and talk to their teachers, talk to their coaches, and see how their performance is in school, maybe on the play field and academically. It's just, you hear these stories of kids who commit suicide and their parents are just totally shocked.
Yeah.
I'm certainly not judging anybody. It's remarkable, though, how, and you read about these stories where there's gun violence also. Somebody, there's like a mass shooting in a school, and everybody who knows the perpetrator is just shocked because this seemed like a normal kid, a happy kid, what have you. I just think that there must be telltale signs. So we just really need to pay attention, connect with teachers and coaches and social workers at school, and talk to your kids. And this is obviously not rocket science. I'm not telling you anything you don't know already, but and I guess the take home message that we can still be surprised by our kids' behavior, and self-harm, violence against others, etc. It just can seem to come out of nowhere, but obviously we can do our best to be plugged in with our kids.
I think that idea of, you had even mentioned it earlier. This you had said, we love our kids. That goes without saying. And I was almost going to be like, but it should still be said, right? More than that, I think it needs to be shown, right? The idea, coming back to the idea of like love is a verb, right? And so like participating and behaving with love, right? Building out from there, I guess, just as a way to sort of bring things to a close, so something I often try to sort of explore on the show is this idea of, you even talked about it, the idea of like, hope and sort of like not just turning to the negative bias of the future. And something I try to highlight with guests is this idea of like, what is something that kind of is giving you hope for the future, especially because things can feel so dark and heavy and grim right now, So I'm curious, from the lens of your research and the work that you're doing, what's something that kind of gives you hope about the youth that are coming up today and where they're going?
I have a daughter who just started college, and I got to know several of her friends pretty well. And what gives me hope is how, despite all of these challenges that they face that are relatively unique to this generation of teenagers, and we didn't even talk about COVID and
Well,
and the
yeah.
ramifications that
Yeah.
kids suffered from that.
Yeah.
But what gives me hope is just the resilience that I do see among them, how they are remarkable young beings. There's something in the fabric of being a human being that allows for hope,
Hmm.
because we are pretty remarkable creatures. And I think when you see teens thriving despite all of these challenges, it does give us hope. And I think sometimes we just have to remind ourselves of that too,
Yeah.
in addition to concentrating on how we can nurture all those characteristics. But yes, I think kids are remarkable,
Yeah.
and there is a reason to be hopeful and optimistic despite all of the negativity.
Yeah. Dr. Greg Hammer, what a pleasure it's been to chat with you. Like I say, I've got a million more questions for you, but I know we got to wrap things up. So first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for being on the show with me, but I'm curious, where would you like to kind of point listeners to next? Where would you like them to find you?
There's lots of places you can just
Yeah.
Google my name and find the book, A Mindful Teen. It's also on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and elsewhere.
And it'll be in
My
the show notes for this episode as well.
There's the website for the book is amindfulteen.com. My website is greghammermd.com. I'm on Instagram, greghammermd. And so I just want to tell all your listeners, just remind them that we're all pretty much the same. The dark thoughts that we have are not unique to us. They're not our dirty little secret. We're all much more alike than we are different. The chances are pretty good that if we're struggling with something, so are many, many other people. And don't be overly hard on yourself.
Yeah.
That's the thing that I'm working on. That's
Yeah.
my lingering challenge myself. But we're all in this together. We're
Yeah.
all brothers and sisters. We're all made of the same stuff.
Yeah.
Let's kind of celebrate that.
Yeah, I love that. What very last thing, real quickly, I love to try and leave my listeners with one actionable thing they could try doing this week. I often frame it around like what's something they could do to be a more effective friend, either to themselves or their community, but we could open it up to wherever you like to go with it. I'm curious, what's one thing listeners could try this week to kind of be more effective to themselves or to their community?
Well, we talked about the gain practice, but we
Yeah.
talked about 3 good things. So maybe
Mm.
for this week, think of 3 good things that in your day before you go to sleep tonight, and do that every day for a week. Doesn't take much to start bending the curve and changing the way those neurons are firing and communicating with each other. And again, baby steps, but try the 3 good things practice and see how simple it is and see what the effects are. Because I think gratitude is a miraculous thing to embrace.
It really, really is. Well, at least one of my good things was chatting with you today, Doctor. So thank you so
Likewise.
much. And yeah, have a wonderful day.
Likewise. Truly my pleasure.
Yes. And that's it. Thank you one more time to Dr. Hammer for coming on the show and chatting with me. It was such a pleasure to get to know him and to hear all about his incredible work. If you'd like to learn more or if you'd like to check out his books, the link for that is in the show notes. And hey, while you're poking around in there, why not leave Friendless a 5-star review? It's free for you and it helps me out a ton. Thank you so much in advance. I love you. If you're listening to this episode on the day that it comes out, then you are in luck, because that means you haven't missed the recording of the next live episode in my collaboration with Book Warehouse. On Wednesday, January 21st at 2 p.m., I'm going to be live in the store recording an interview with Susan Nielsen, the author of one of my brand new favorite books called Snap. We're going to be chatting about the book, about all kinds of other stuff. It's going to be an absolute blast. Come on down to the store, Book Warehouse on Main Street in Vancouver at 2 p.m. and be a part of the show. And if you're listening to this after, well, hey, you're still in luck because that episode is going to be on the feed next week. I don't really have anything else to plug, so I'm just going to wrap things up here. Let's go home early, right? Thank you so much for listening to the episode. And I really hope I will catch you back here either live in person on Wednesday or back here on the feed next week. But hey, I'm not going to worry about that right now, and neither should you, because that is then, and this is now. So for now, I'll just say I love you, and I wish you well. Fun and safety, sweet peas.